Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome, quite literally, for once in Brussels to you all. It's great that you could join us. We know how much competition there is for everyone's time at the moment, how many events are going on. So we're thrilled to have so many of you with us. My name is Joanna Inglis. I'm Director for Advocacy and Political Affairs at EuroCommerce. And we're really pleased to be holding this event today on identifying green skills to transform retail and wholesale and meet its sustainability potential. Obviously, it's especially good to be holding an event on this topic this week because it's EU Green Week, as you will know, with the theme of delivering a net zero world. And why is the retail and wholesale sector particularly relevant when we start thinking about skills and education and training? Well, quite simply, it's because of the vast number of people that the retail and wholesale sector employs. So we're talking about 26 million employees, which represents 13% of the EU workforce and plays a key role as an education and training engine for the EU. So there's vast amounts of potential to integrate sustainability in the training of the workforce for the retail and wholesale sector. And in addition to that, the industry's sustainability transformation is really critical to its future competitiveness. So for the transformation to happen, and today you're going to hear all about exactly what's needed for this transformation from our many different speakers. But fundamentally, it needs to be underpinned by people with the right skills. So there is no way around that. We need to make sure that the people working in the sector have the skills that they need in order to make the transformation, not just sustainably, but also in terms of digital skills and digitalization, which we all know is becoming an increasing part of everyday life for everyone. So, in terms of the investment that's needed for skills specifically, you're going to hear more details about this and get a better understanding of how this is going to work. But in a broad terms, the investment that's needed in skills, upskilling and reskilling employees is around 35 billion euros, and that's between now and 2030. So it's a pretty significant investment. In terms of the investment that's needed in sustainability changes, is even bigger than that. It's about 350 billion euro that's needed to make the sector more sustainable and achieve sustainability targets by 2030. So a lot to be done there. And what it's going to mean for employees is training up to 13 million employees and hiring up to 1.5 million new people every year right up to 2030. So a big investment there of effort as well as money. So we've also been calling on the European Commission, and we'll continue to do so, for more support for SMEs. And SMEs form a really crucial part of the beating heart of commerce and retail and wholesale of pretty much every community across the EU. But they have specific challenges, and the challenges that SMEs will face compared to larger or medium-sized retail and wholesale players are quite different. So we have to look at them and give them special support wherever possible, which is what many of our members spend their day-to-day life doing. We should also give a mention to the Skills Partnership for the Retail Ecosystem, which is part of the European Commission's Pact for Skills initiative, and in partnership with Uni Europa lays the foundation to identify skills gaps and anticipates the need of the sector so it can make green and digital transformation. So we're going to be talking more about that this afternoon as well. And then fundamentally, I think also this afternoon is an opportunity with this seminar to understand what green skills really can mean for the retail and wholesale sector and how to develop a green mindset in going forward. So without any further introduction, I'd be very happy to hand over to our keynote speakers for this afternoon. They are Thomas Rudiger Smith and Kathleen Martins from McKinsey. So they are going to present to us today on the findings of their study that they've done with EuroCommerce on transforming the retail and wholesale sector, on how skills underpin and the transformation that we can expect. So just a couple of words about Thomas. He is the leader of McKinsey's consumer retail practice in Denmark. and the leader of McKinsey's growth and marketing and sales practice in the Nordics. And since joining McKinsey, Thomas has focused on supporting consumer and retail clients with driving holistic transformations supported by customer insights. Whereas Kathleen has worked for 13 years with McKinsey and after 5 years in media and FMCG sectors, for both the retailers and manufacturers across Europe, mainly on strategic and commercial topics, including transactions. At the moment, she leads the consumer practice for Benelux, and her work touches upon green growth and how to valorize green investments. So, Thomas and Kathleen, over to you both.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're gonna try and do it without microphone. Please let us know if we're not speaking loud enough. Thank you very much for the introduction. We've had the pleasure of partnering with EuroCommerce for the last 3 years, run a whole range of reports. Lately, we published State of Grocery, which came out just over a month ago, but it's true last year we did the wholesale transformation report, which I think is located around the room, and we'll share a few stats from both kind of reports over the next 10 minutes. So first and foremost, if we look back at the last year and kind of how do we think about sustainability, obviously the last year we've talked about cost of living crisis, the whole retail sector dominated by inflation, consumers really penny pinching, down trading and so forth. However, if we then start looking forward a little, okay, we'll try this then instead. If we then start looking forward a little bit, we are starting to see real wages improving. We're starting to see inflation come down. And with that, the overall business sentiment is actually improving for the CEOs at large. However, throughout this entire period, we have actually seen sustainability hold up remarkably well. So basically, and in a partnership we've had with Nielsen, we've looked at kind of how our category spending happening. And in 2 out of 3 categories, we see sustainable products and products with sustainability claims perform better than the average product in the market. We also know that 40% of consumers still want to buy sustainable products and at least state that they're willing to spend more on those products. So all in all, the demand is there. However, at the same time, we also know consumers are getting more and more educated, and greenwashing is becoming a bigger and bigger topic for the sector at large. The other thing we've done is that early this year and the same last year, asked a whole range of retail CXOs, and earlier this year, mainly grocery CXOs, how are they thinking about sustainability and where does that range? And it is still a top 3 topic for them. So it is still extremely high on the sector's agenda, and it should be. Retail holds 40% of the European GHG emissions. 30% of that comes from grocery, and of course the other 10 comes from apparel. Vast majority of that lies well outside of kind of the scope 1 and scope 2 and into scope 3. And I think what we'll talk a little bit about now is what are some of those shifts that are going to be required in order to kind of actually tackle that problem, mainly from a skill set point of view, but also there's a few other things we can do.
Super, thank you. So look, we are consultants, so we like to give things in 3. So we also see 3 big unlocks when it comes to sustainability, and then especially also in combination with the talent debate that you are having. So first off, an argument, of course, that we often hear is, yeah, but if we look at the total emissions that are being attributed to retail and consumer goods, only 10% lies into the direct control, meaning scope 1 and 2, of the retailers itself. You could argue, yeah, it's only 10%, but that is still 10%. Yeah. And so working on those 10% actually already can make a very big difference. And what we know from our research is, 1, the big delta shifts are very often on store operations and logistics. Yeah, and Thomas and I both work extensively in this field. I can very easily say that there is not a single study that we do where we don't find a lot of potential, even with already very sophisticated retailers. So there is still a lot of untapped potential remaining in that area. And in the meantime, 2 out of 3 sustainability efforts when it comes to greenification of, for instance, transportations or store operations have a positive ROI. So we have moved, thanks to, of course, a maturing of technology and more broadly availability of solutions, we have moved also into an area where the availability of solutions and the financial attractiveness of those solutions has actually changed. Now, this, of course, still requires CapEx. It's a long-term positive benefit. But if you compare this to 5 or 10 years ago, there was no positive business case. This was more done out of this is the right thing to do. Now we actually see that on most of the efforts that you can be undertaking, you actually have margin expansion, though requiring capex. So it does require a change in your P&L. It does require an investment, but with a positive ROI in the long term. So for us, the first unlock is starting to really double down on the 10% that you can impact. And in 2 out of the 3 cases, you will actually also financially benefit from it in the long term. I think the second one then goes to the other 90%, right, which is mostly in the scope 3 and which, of course, becomes a bit more complicated. About half of those emissions are immediately farm-related, yeah, because they basically come from the meat and the dairy industry. And there, of course, completely rethinking how we do agriculture, especially in Europe, will be part of that solution. The other part is much more related to apparel or to durables. And then, of course, topics such as extending the life cycle of products, recyclability, using much more upcycled or recycled materials become much more important. And as you can notice from the examples that I'm giving here, this becomes a value chain discussion. And this you need to address as a sector, as a category. Of course, as an individual retailer, this becomes much more complicated to achieve. But we do see completely new operating models emerging in some of the categories. And we also know, for instance, from a survey that we ran amongst CXOs earlier this year, that one of the top priorities of CXOs is investigating backward vertical integration to exactly get way better grip on the supply chain and therefore also on the traceability and the sustainability of the products that you actually source. Very interesting evolution, and I'm pretty sure we will see a lot of new collaborations emerging. This, of course, requires a quite big change of the industry. And maybe I give a bit of an extreme examples with the hard discounters, who have a very strong, pure negotiation logic with their suppliers. Of course, if you really want to transform a category, really want to address scope 3 across the value chain, you need to move away from a pure negotiation logic and to a totally new operating model with your suppliers, where also within McKinsey, we increasingly start to talk about partners and less about suppliers. And then unlock number 3 for us is the entire talent discussion. Yeah. First off, working on sustainability requires a whole new skill set. Let's give a few examples. You need to be able to do sustainable product design, for instance, in electronics or in clothing. You need to help your frontline staff in terms of sales and commercial skills to enable them to help consumers to make sustainable choices. In finance, you need to help your controllers not only look at business cases from a financial point of view, but also learn those people to make abatement curves. And the procurement division, of course, needs to learn how to do green procurement. These are, of course, all completely new skills. And what we found in prior efforts that we have done is that one, a general upskilling of the entire organization is required. And 2, that it's important to find a way to embed that within the given organization. We see a lot of companies then starting a sustainability cell with all different kinds of experts, but that very quickly becomes a bit what we call the green police, yeah, where life in the business continues as is, and then you have a few of Greenpeace-like people nagging the business, supposedly, on how to do things differently. That's a model that doesn't work. Yeah? Of course, you need to develop the expertise. A head of sustainability might be a very important role model for the organization, but you need to find a way where anybody in procurement, anybody in finance starts to consider sustainability business as usual, yeah, and not being constantly challenged by a separate department on the side. That's for the internal skills and the internal organization. Now, of course, realistically speaking, you will also have to hire. Yeah, some of these skills will be very hard to just develop on the inside, and I think similar to digital, big data analytics, etc., there is also a new source of talent to tap into in the external world. Now, we know also, and this is an interesting parallel with advanced analytics, all of a sudden, you don't compete for that talent just within retail, yeah? You compete for that talent across the value chain. And then often, of course, retail does not necessarily have the most attractive value proposition for that type of talent. If you look at the programmers or the people that can really do customer insights, very often prefer to go to Facebook or Instagram instead of going to the retail sector. We expect a similar fight for talent, yeah, when it comes to these sustainability skills. However, we do believe that retailers can really make a difference here. If you make sustainability a true part of your value proposition, yeah, you will see that you will also be much better at attracting the talent of the future. We know from our research that sustainability and responsibility as an employer is now part of the top 3 considerations of the younger generations when they seek employment. This is, of course, an area where local retailers can really make a difference. But also here, it cannot be greenwashing. It really has to be walking the talk, so to speak. Lastly, so apart from hiring and upskilling internally, we do also want to, again, build on the partnership argument. This is a topic which retailers in itself will not be able to fix. It will require new collaboration models. So that also means that the way you address the talent question also needs to be seen in light of that. If you look, for instance, also at marketing and social media, also that talent model has completely changed, right? Where retailers work with an ecosystem of digital agencies, etc., to tap into that very specific expertise and no longer develop everything in-house. We also believe that when you think of sustainability, very likely we will go to a very similar operating model that for specific types of expertise, you will work in an ecosystem with partners, with agencies, and not just require the full development of the talent bench on the inside. Good. I hope I haven't lost you a bit in this monologue. I'll give it back to Thomas for the wrap-up.
I will try and synthesize it then. So a few things to take in mind. Number one, despite where we're at in the current economic environment, sustainability still matters. Consumers want it and businesses want it. That's number one. Number two, there's a lot of things we can already do now on scope 1 and scope 2. It just requires investment. But number 3, which is really, really important, we believe if we really have to tackle scope 3 emissions, then we have to rethink the talent model, which requires kind of thinking much more holistically around it than just who do I hire and how do I upskill my organization.
Great, thank you so much, Thomas and Kathleen. That was a really lightning speed overview of a very complex topic, but I think you covered everything to give us a really clear picture of the sorts of issues that you're looking at and the sorts of issues we should all be thinking about going forwards. So I think we have a few minutes for Q&A. I don't know if does anybody have a question at the ready? Otherwise, maybe to give you a bit of time, I could ask a quick question. So I think it was really interesting what you were saying about the return on investment for skills and sustainability and skills combined. But given, as you know, as well as anybody, the current economic climate that retail and wholesale is facing, the depressed margins, the depressed consumer spending, the high energy costs, etc., the inflation, are there any specific investments that can be made that have a particularly fast return on investment?
It, of course, depends a bit on given situations, but things such as rethinking fridges, rethinking lighting, rethinking entry doors and how you do the heating around those, they tend to have payback times below 2 years, right? Which starts to become quite attractive. Yeah, and we are also in an era where, because probably a lot of you think, yeah, but we've already done that. But what we see is that you have new technology with new types of doors for fridges, new types of lighting solutions. So you see that technology-wise, this area continues to evolve very quickly. So these are typically investments with super fast payback times. Also things such as automation of lighting, automation of screens, because very often personnel leaves lights on at night, screens on at night, etc. Also, these type of solutions have very attractive payback times.
Okay, great. Yes, a question over here. Thanks.
I don't speak so loud.
Je maîtrise le français si vous désirez.
C'est peut-être mieux, oui, c'est parfait. Je vois que votre premier point, c'est une affirmation. Les clients ou les consommateurs recherchent la sustainability. Moi, je le mets en doute tout de suite, en fait. Ils le disent, mais ils ne le font pas. Et on l'a vu l'an dernier avec l'inflation qui est arrivée. Les produits bio ont baissé en vente et en valeur. Donc je pense que, en fait, tout ce dont on discute, que l'on soit des professionnels de l'agriculture, des industriels, des retailers, on oublie toujours le dernier maillon de la chaîne qui est le consommateur, qui est le seul responsable en réalité de ça. Donc on aimerait qu'il soit comme ça, on aimerait qu'il aille de l'avant, qu'il a ses idées et il les déclare. Mais le portefeuille, dès qu'il s'agit en fait d'acheter quelque chose, ne suit pas. Et donc, je pense qu'il faut être très, très prudent par rapport à ça. Ces initiatives dont vous parliez pour les retailers, 10%, vous avez dit après donc, que les 90% qui restaient, la moitié, ça venait de l'agriculture. Donc, on est déjà à 45%, donc 4 fois et demi plus que ce que le retail peut faire. Et là, ça dépendrait effectivement aussi des consommateurs. S'ils réduisaient leur consommation de viande, par exemple, ce qu'ils devraient faire, eh bien, manifestement, ça aiderait énormément. Donc, je pense qu'il y a énormément d'actions, mais il ne faut pas être dans le wishful thinking. On a des belles théories ici à Bruxelles, mais quand on est dans la réalité du terrain, on s'aperçoit que, encore pour pas mal d'années, probablement, elles vont faire face à des murs, en tout cas vis-à-vis de ces consommateurs. Il faudrait absolument arriver à convaincre les consommateurs. Et ce que l'on voit, vous parlez de partenariat. Moi, j'étais le directeur de centrales d'achat, nationales et internationales, avec des industriels, je n'ai jamais vu ça. Donc moi, je suis content que vous parlez des discounters, Aldi ou Lidl peut-être en font, mais dans le retail traditionnel, il n'y a pas de partenariat. Il y a des oppositions. On a des intérêts à un moment commun qui permettent de négocier des contrats. Mais en dehors de ça, il n'y en a pas vraiment. Et c'est très dommage, évidemment. Il faudra arriver à ça. Mais pour arriver à ça, il faudrait qu'on arrête, c'est tout le but d'EuroCommerce, de se disputer à longueur de journée, et plutôt qu'on fasse un peu front commun vis-à-vis du consommateur, pour essayer de lui expliquer qu'il doit payer beaucoup plus aujourd'hui son alimentation. Quand on pense que c'est 11% en gros, enfin en France c'est ça, du pouvoir d'achat des ménages consacré à l'alimentation exclusivement hors DPH, c'est très très faible, c'était 30% il y a 30 ans. Il faut absolument arriver à travailler ensemble pour aller beaucoup plus loin. Bon, pardon d'avoir été un peu long.
Ça vous dérange si je réponds en anglais? And you're absolutely right. And I don't think the purpose of the speech was to be a bit ignorant of the reality out there. There are a few things, though, that I want to give as a message to the room. Is one, consumers are ready to pay, but for credible things where they believe that it shifts the needle. Yeah, we know from our research, for instance, that sustainability of packaging is considered to be just doing good business, and there is no consumer ready to pay anymore for that. Now, you can argue against it and say that that's not fair, but that's a bit where we are, right? And the thing is also that sustainability is then thrown onto a pile where every single initiative should lead to consumers paying more. It's very clear for what consumers are ready to pay more versus what they are not. And sustainable packaging, in the meantime, is just considered the recyclable plastic. I mean, that's considered now to be the standard. I know we are far away from that, but in the mind of the consumer, that is where we are. However, the other example that I would like to give is Oatly. Yeah, 1 liter of oat milk, not more expensive to make, versus 1 liter of regular dairy milk, twice the price. Yeah. So if you come with and yes, we can talk about the stock exchange price of Oatly, etc. But the point that I want to make is if you come with a credible, reliable marketing story, yeah, there is money in the pocket, even in these challenging times. Oatly is still growing volumes in Europe, even despite that they're twice as expensive as the alternative, yeah, in a European context. Yeah, and of course it's a very big marketing machine, etc. But it shows that it can be done. I think the challenge is a bit hitting the right nail with the consumer. The second thing that I want to highlight is, and I'm doing this as we speak for the moment, we are looking at the decarbonization of bread. And there are two big levers in making the bread that we eat every day way more sustainable. One is shifting from synthetic fertilizer to the green fertilizer. Yeah. The second one is renewable energy with the baking. Yeah. With these two things, you cut the CO2 footprint of any bread with 80%. The green fertilizer costs 3 cents per kilo. 3 cents per kilo, right? And the average price of a kilo of bread in Europe is 3.3 euro. So there are lots of things that can be done at way cheaper prices than we think. And the message that I also want to leave here with the room is to focus on the things that really will shift the needle. It can be a huge difference, very little impact in terms of pricing towards the consumer. Nobody is working on it. And this comes back to the capability question. It's because nobody masters the abatement curve of bread, which nonetheless is a category everybody here eats every single day, yeah, and tries to push that as an initiative going forward. And so I think this is I hope, a very good example for you when you think of the talent, how to hire the talent that will really look at those initiatives that will really shift the needle on the sustainability debate. We constantly get these questions on like hyper complex type of projects that then cut the emissions with 1%, right? Of course, if we do that, we're never gonna get there, yeah? But as a retailer, what are the 5 big drivers of my abatement curve and how do I go after those? Again, I do not want to diminish all the challenges, but I want to give a positive message about opportunities. Let me put it that way.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathleen. Yeah, it's a really good question and one that comes up very often about, there being a mismatch in terms of the reality on the ground. Consumers say they want sustainability, but are they actually willing to pay for it? And how to improve that dynamic and improve that reality. So
maybe just one quick one. I think there's also part of this, which is the consumers don't know what is sustainability, right? And I think that's where, basically the EU also has a role to play, right? Because like if you ask a consumer to choose between 2 garments, is organic cotton sourced from far away better than something that is, sourced more locally that is non-organic? The consumer cannot answer that question. Is an organic cucumber that is sourced again from Spain, if I live in Denmark, better than a local cucumber? They can't answer that question. And retailers are actually not doing anything to help them. But we also haven't come up with a unified measurement system that everybody can agree on. So until you start creating that transparency, you're also making it extremely hard for the consumer to create an educated choice. And therefore, they don't know if they're truly paying for more sustainability or if they're paying for greenwashing. And it's a little bit up to the sectors to solve that question.
Absolutely. Thanks, Thomas. Do we have time for one more question? Is there any other questions out there? Then I would just ask a very quick one, and it's probably quite a difficult one to answer, but if you look at how Europe is doing and how the different member states in Europe are doing in terms of really upskilling, improving the training and education of teams and employees, and if you look at how they're doing with their sustainability measures, how would you say it compares across Europe? Is there a best in class that you could cite, or an example of something where you've really been impressed and you feel it's really systemic, the approach that's being taken by the retail wholesale sector? And how perhaps do we compare to what's being done in the rest of the world?
Tough
Easy
question.
one.
I'll have a go and then you can see what you can. I'd say actually, holistically speaking, I would say Europe is probably at the forefront, especially when we look at the retail sector. We're not seeing any other markets where where the retailers have fully kind of set their science-based targets and they, have a clear commitment and stuff like that. So I'd say, yes, we're ahead. When it then comes to the second part of your question, which is like, how are we performing against those expectations? Quite holistically, quite poorly. there is, I mean, I think when we do the traffic lights of, you know, where are people versus where all of these different companies against their science-based targets, I think the reality is that they're very far away from, you know, being able to realize the ambitions by 2030. And that will require a huge amount of acceleration, which then gets to the people question, which is, are we truly doing enough from a people agenda point of view? I'm not sure if we are, but I don't have any kind of concrete examples of anybody who is doing it more better than anybody else, for that matter.
Okay, great. Well, thank you both very much. Just all of us to give a round of applause to Kathleen and Thomas. Thank you so much for your presentation and overview. Then it's my pleasure to hand over to my colleague, Lena Whitaker, who's Director for Competitiveness at EuroCommerce, for the next panel discussion on green skills in practice.
Thank you very much. I think it's quite nice to move now on, and if I may invite my panelists up. So we have Manuela Gelling from the Commission, who is the Director for Skills. There's no particular order, so please take a place this seat. And we now also have Shannon Custard, who is leading the Global Competence Development and Learning Organisation at IKEA Inca Group. So working really on developing the global strategy for learning, competence development, skills and learning technology. And then may I invite Davide Rossi to come to the stage as well, who is the Director General of Aries, who is also bringing together many groups working on the distribution of consumer electronic products. And if I may invite Annika from Uni Europa. Annika Flatten is the Director of the Commerce and Tourism sector of Uni Europa, the European Services Workers Union. And finally, if I may invite you, Thomas Ravanelli, who is a Junior Achievement alumni. So if that doesn't mean anything to you now, it should do by the end of this panel. So just to introduce, really after the listening to what we've heard this just in the introduction, I mean, what we want to now go into a little bit more of a deep dive is to really understand what green skills could mean in practice. So it was probably a little bit hard to ask who's doing better, Europe or the rest of the world, but perhaps Manuela, if I may ask you just, what is the Commission doing in terms of highlighting the need for skills, and is there a match between what is happening in terms of green skills training programs with the needs of companies to be ready for that transformation by 2030?
Thank you. I think we could stay here for a few hours to answer your questions, but briefly to say that this is the year of skills, and the basic reasons why we need a year of skills is that we are not doing so well, in the sense that if we look at the target that we have set ourselves for 2030, which is to give every adult to allow that at least 60% of adults train at least once a year, we are far from that now. We are at 37%. So there is a long way to go. And why do we need to go towards that objective? Is because we are in the green and in the digital transitions, which have accelerated because of COVID, because of the war in Ukraine, because of the energy crisis. And now we realize that we have a demographics that doesn't help, because we have less and less young people coming into the labor market, and we have a workforce that has not the right skills. So the year is about really focusing on changing the mindset, basically of the adults, because adults tend to agree that training is a good thing, but not for themselves. So I think it's really about changing the mindset. It's about having training that also responds better to the needs of companies, but also the aspirations of people, and that we do the training that is needed, that addresses the challenges. And I think if we compare ourselves to other countries in the world, I think there are countries that are doing better in terms of training their adults. There are also wide divergences within Europe. And where we are particularly not good in Europe is with the low skilled and low qualified I think percentage-wise, we don't score particularly well compared to our competitors. And that's why also the Year of Skills has as one of its objectives to attract talent, because everyone needs to upskill and reskill. But we also know that if we focus on our adult workforce, if we manage to get all the women into the labor market, because we know the employment rate of women is lower, if we also are successful in getting young people into the labor market that are not in education or training or employment, we will still need talent from outside to ensure that our economy remains competitive and is able to innovate. So these are, in a nutshell, the challenges that we see, and that's why we have this Year of Skills, really to focus on the needs. And I understand that the retail sector is no different from other sectors. We are experiencing in several occupations shortage of labor, and this is a clear sign that there is a mismatch between the needs that companies have and the skills that people have.
I think this certainly is one thing I noted from the introduction was the next fight for talent is about sustainability skills. So I think I see that we're still chasing the tail perhaps on the data scientists, but there looks like there's a whole world that's next to come. So Shannon, if I may turn to you. So I think it's really clear that there's a lot that can be done by retail and wholesale. I think it's the 10% that greenhouse gas direct emissions that really there could be a change, but to get there, the capabilities, I mean, the skills that underlie this, it's super broad. What is it that could really be needed? And I just wondered if you could just explain a little bit about, is it easy to define green skills for your business? And how are you approaching it to actually be able to make that sustainability transformation?
Of course. I would say overall, my very honest answer is it depends. It depends on where you are on the broader skills journey. This is a really new place for many organizations and how they want to structure, how they work with skills. A big journey that we've been on with Inca the last year is we've been taking a lot of time to set up what I would say is kind of the foundational elements that really will allow us to build different skills on top of that. So one of those things is identifying what is our broad skill strategy throughout Inca and how is it anchored throughout the organization. Another one is what is the taxonomy that we want to use? How do we want to define skills? How do we want to kind of utilize words within the definitions of skills that create relevance for our populations and our coworkers? And then the last one, which is maybe the most complicated, is how do we want to, and what's the methodology that we want to utilize to sustain those skills? And all of this is before you even start to talk about green skills or core skills or functional skills. And from an Inca standpoint, what we've been focused on is we actually started our strategy with functional skills. So we decided to start there and map these across the entire organization, which will be rolled out over the next few years to all of our coworkers with two kind of common things in mind. We wanted to secure that as these went live, every coworker in the organization had access and equitable access to the skills that they need for their role today and tomorrow. But also now that we have kind of that foundation in place, we're able to start building some of these other elements like core skills and green skills on top of it. I think another thing that makes it complicated when you're trying to define one of these areas is you also need a supporting strategy. And you all were mentioning it earlier. You need to have, especially for green skills, kind of a very clear point of view from an organization standpoint of what is your sustainability strategy? How are you looking to support that? And I say all this to say, if you have those things in place, it's not that it's easy, but it is much simpler than if you're trying to build something without those foundational elements. And that's where we are today. So again, we've been spending the last year building these foundational elements, and we just now are beginning the process of trying to define not only what do we mean by when we say green skills within Inca, but then how do we want to take that to the over 170,000 coworkers we have, the majority of which are frontline and in retail, right? They're not sitting behind desks. They don't have the same access or understanding. And we're really looking to figure out how can we create something that is relevant, that results in action. And I think this is the big challenge that retailers will face from our point of view in the future is how do you create something with green skills that actually results in your coworkers and employees taking action, whether that is selling something to a customer or something that they're doing on their own or something they're doing within their role. So I would say maybe, no, it's not so simple, but there are things that can help you complete it.
Thank you. I think it's, I wasn't expecting the answer to be, it was very simple. But one thing that you also said is that it's making sure that every co-worker has access and actually resulting in action. So Davide, if I may pass the mic to you there, then, because you're representing companies that are distributing wholesale appliances, consumer electronics, like the washing machines that we all take for granted at home. And part of that action is actually putting in place the EU rules, for example. And some of this might also be related directly to waste disposal of electronic equipment as well. So how are you supporting retailers, and also what skills are there that's necessary to include everybody, including the smaller entrepreneurs?
Yes, I have to say, first of all, that our sector has a double mission, because first of all, we are to teach to our guys working in the shops how to be more sustainable. And secondly, they can be teachers. They can educate consumers about energy labels, consumption, water consumption, and many other issues again. And this is not an easy task because, of course, the market is very competitive. People tend to look mainly at the price and not at the other functions. Then there are the issue, of course, of repairability, which is also another heavy point to tackle. And all these things are at the moment coming all together on the relevant tables at European level, but also at national level. And this is a fantastic opportunity in reality for our sector to show how technology can help environment and not being enemy of the environment, as it was considered for a long time. So first of all, the first step that the sector as a whole did it was, of course, to support the new energy labels, which is already a very important point. But of course, a larger attention to repairability, for instance, is another heavy point that you have to put on the table and attention on everybody. And in this, I have to say, there is a sort of struggle between manufacturers and retailers. Because if we will be able to make a good competition between manufacturers and retailers about the broken products, this would be great. Because in this moment, when the consumer is arriving at the broken product, the easiest way is to say, buy a new one. And everybody is convinced that retailers and manufacturers are happy to push people to replace their old products. Not necessarily is like this, because if we think economically at the margins that retailers have for certain products, mobile phones, for instance, this margin is very small. Maybe it would be much more profitable and interesting and environmentally friendly for a retailer to propose the reparation of the product. But to do so, manufacturers should be compelled to make spare parts available. Maybe labor costs should be a little bit reduced. 3D printers should be maybe entering in this, but of course the software must be made available by manufacturers. And we have all the issues concerning patents, concerning brands. And also, there are intellectual property is of course a good thing, but on the other way should not stop from the possibility to give consumers the choice, a new one or an old one, repaired by the retailer. No more repaired by the manufacturer or by someone authorized by the manufacturer. Of course, the standard must be high, but the kind of warranty that the retailer can give, why should be inferior of the warranty that the manufacturer could give? As a joke, I say to my Italian friends, we in Italy like to be a little bit open in our speaking, say, at least the retailer has a window. You can go there with a stone if you're not happy. The manufacturer maybe is in China. It's a little bit more difficult to complain to him. So this is a joke, but territoriality, proximity is very important. And when we explain to the people that we are not there to sell products. We are there to provide them a service. Whatever it is they want to buy, they can buy. They want repair, we can do it. We must be put by the Commission in the position to be able to perform this job.
And if I may just sort of dive in a little bit, if you are talking about retailers who are really at the forefront here, and as a trade association, you're that bridge between the legislation, between what's happening here in Brussels and on what's happening on the ground. And I understand that your association has done some very hands-on projects to try to make that a reality, to help learn those skills so that actually that interface is something that is easy for everybody to take part in.
Oh, thank you. This is I'm very proud of this that you asked me this, because I manage both the Italian and the European Association of Consumer Electronics, and this is an Italian project, so I'm a little bit proud as a patriot about this. Now, so I know that Italy has a lot to do in terms of sustainability. We have to work a lot. We hope that also, of course, the recovery fund will be also used to make our country work better in this direction. This is an Italian project. We have decided to make available, through an agreement that the manufacturers and retailers made, to make available some funds for the small and medium enterprises which want to launch individual communication projects on sustainability, in particular on recycling. So there is an incentive for the small companies, for shops, also for single shops in case, that they produce a private collection point. So they have it's not a big money, it's 2,000 euro, but okay, for a small shop, 2,000 euro can be the right reason to create a small area in the shop to collect this product, and they are granted that they will be recollected by the collection schemes. Collection schemes are all coordinated by a clearance house, and the clearance house is giving collection scheme the full map of where these products can be recollected. Of course, with the best logistics in order not to avoid empty trucks and whatever. Second initiative, these shops or this larger company, they will have economic incentive when they make communication campaign. They must invest at least 5,000 euro in a communication campaign, and they can have a support up to 25,000 for performing something. Can be a nationwide action for the biggest company. Of course, maybe they make an investment of 500,000 euro and they receive only 25, like a sort of award. But in any case, we shall award them in a celebration, and so they will have in any case good return of image when they do this job. And maybe the small one, they will have a local small project, I don't know, the day of collection of electronic waste, and they spend 10,000, but they have 5,000 from us. So, but they must make their own investment. This will also push, we wish, the individual, the family-run companies to have someone, hopefully maybe the youngest of the family, to think a little bit about a single project. And the jury will work completely independently. They shall not receive calls from the association, from us, or for whatever. And they have the one only mandate to reward the brilliant ideas, to reward new things, not the big project from the top PR company. Of course, this would be too easy to reward them. No, when we find a magic idea, something very sexy, something very new, this will be rewarded. And this is the project. We make during the Milano Green Week in September, we shall appoint the winners of this initiative.
It sounds very exciting. It also, again, is showing that green skills could really have a huge breadth, because I think you've just covered communication and also the innovation aspect, which I think in some probably was a little bit more assumed. But if I can just quickly turn back to Shannon, actually, because I think it was said very much in the beginning as well, it's not about having the green police, it's about having that green mindset throughout the entirety of the workforce. And you've got 170,000 on your front line. So how are you developing that green spirit with your employees?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we're in the beginning of this. So as I mentioned before, we're kind of on the journey, and we're here to share a bit of that with everybody and learn at the same time. But we're actually looking at a few different things, and none of these have been firmly decided, but I'm happy to share. And maybe we will do one of these or a combination, and maybe we will find something completely different. But I think what we're really looking for, and I love what you said, that we need to teach people, but then they become teachers. That is the movement that we're looking to make with our coworkers. We need to figure out how to create advocates and create people that are
passionate, but able to take that passion and kind of uniquely apply it in their day to day. So we have a few different approaches that we're considering. I mean, one of them is to have very targeted green skills that are linked to jobs that are more aligned to, I would say, the very standard green jobs that we're often talking about. The challenge that we find within that space is within Inca, we don't have a significant amount of those. So that becomes a challenge. That doesn't then represent that over 170,000 number. The other thing that we're looking at is how can we integrate some of our green skills into jobs that can make a really big impact. And you all mentioned a couple, but one of the ones that we've been just kind of throwing around is even, I want to say as simple as administrative assistants. And maybe that doesn't totally make sense, but these are individuals that book a ton of travel in our organization. They are organizing big meetings, they are ordering food, they can actually make decisions in that planning process that can have an impact. So we're trying to look through all of the skills that we've mapped in the past year and then determine where does it make sense and where could we integrate this that these people feel really empowered and that they're actually making a difference. And then the last thing that we're looking at is, do we have maybe one green skill that is assigned to everyone in the organization that we really look to drive a differentiated dialogue on a regular basis with our coworkers. And we don't know, maybe again, we'll do a combination of these things and maybe we'll pick one to start with. But really the intent is we want to create ambassadors and we want them to be able to take action overall, both for themselves personally, for our customers, and for the organization.
I think it's very interesting to hear as well, because I will turn now to Annika as well, that there's a lot of bottom up, let's say, driving on this green mindset as well. And I think on speaking with you and your colleagues before, it's this employees have a feeling of they want to make a contribution as well. So perhaps you can explain a little bit of some of the examples that you know as well about developing this green mindset, and perhaps you have some suggestions on where companies could also take it further.
Yeah, I'm happy to do. Europa, we are running an ongoing EU-funded project right now on the twin transition. We started to look into the existence of social dialogue and collective agreement covering the twin transition, so to say, but also looking into the obstacles and the challenges by having a social dialogue or collective agreements on twin transition. And also if there was any strategies among our affiliates on how to overcome those obstacles and challenges. And for us it was quite obvious, because together with this, we did this by a survey, we conducted a survey, we did some desk research, we had some discussions and cooperation with our affiliates. And it's quite obvious that there is a lot that has been done when it comes to the digital transition. There's a lot of good examples, good best practices to share and so on, but we didn't find almost nothing when it comes to the green part. And I think, yeah, referring to what Shannon said, if big companies like, for instance, I prefer to say IKEA as I'm a Swede, but are in the beginning of all this, then I don't see it. I'm not. It seems to like we are in the beginning, so we have to bear that in mind. But what we could see, what was quite obvious, that in those countries where they had social dialogue, an ongoing structure, social dialogue, there were some things that had been done. So that is. So, yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't have any concrete examples on building green mindsets. On the other hand, I'm not really sure what green mindsets are. Do they differ from employees and employers? Should they differ? I don't. It's yeah. It needs to be discussed and identified. So to go green together, both employers and employees will have to develop a new abilities and insights into the activities of the company that is valuable for achieving the smoothest and most effective green transition. So, and also to achieve a sustainable transformation at company level, I think it must start with creating a green, like something like a green company culture or it's a bit what you're talking about, even though I'm wording it in a different way. So a green culture or transition, I don't know what to or sustainability program demands company level strategies on the anticipation management of change. We all know that, or at least I'm convinced that social dialogue at both national and European level is an important tool in terms of change, anticipation, and organizing transition. So, and that is by finding and implementing joint solution based on joint or everybody's experiences. And there I think that maybe Unieuropa and EuroCommerce will have something to do, especially when it comes to SMEs and also when it comes to capacity building. So there we, on the European level, have some challenges to tackle. And then we already have to discuss this, but there I am, sorry. So to make a company culture that prior to us being environmentally friendly has to be credible. Therefore, I also think that internally the company has to think of green behaviors that match the green policy that they jointly have identified. So, and also to be able to create and implement a green culture that everybody is part of, believes in, owns, can influence, and where everyone feels that they have a support to drive change regardless of their title. Employees, of course, have to be involved from the very beginning. So, and then we already mentioned it. What is green skills or sustainable skills? It depends on, but what is green skills? And it's not only about energy consumption or recycling goals, carbon emission, waste handling. It's also, and as already been mentioned, also the impact of consumer behavior and expectations. It's the possibility to give green advice and information. It's not only about the products, it's also been mentioned, it's also about the process, shorten the supply chains, repair, reuse, but it's also changed behavior internally. And I already mentioned that before, internally at the workplace. And in retail, the workplaces looks so different when we look into it to the sector. So it looks different when it comes to the store, the warehouses, the offices. So it's also been mentioned the administrative assistants, the finance part. We have the customer service part, call centers, and there are different job roles. Therefore, different departments in the same company needs to identify their specific skills need, but also needed behavior change. So whether a question is, if it's a question of product or processes, there are maybe not radically new skills, rather new knowledge that is needed. So it's important to develop a platform and a joint understanding on the mechanism of climate change and its impact on the environment, the notion of environment risk for the company and the different possible strategies for adaptation, the notion of companies' impact on the environment and different levers for reducing this impact, and the regulatory framework, and then particularly concerning non-financial reporting. So I think it would be good for companies to also figure out how to link their employees' values and support for sustainability with their daily work, with their employees' daily work at the companies and the company's operations. In other words, it's not only in the why, but it's also in the how to embedding sustainability. Another important way of embedding sustainability in a company is to engage and encourage employees in the co-creation of sustainable practices and to act on employee initiatives. Sorry for more or less reading.
But there's a lot of food for thought in there, Annika, so it's very much appreciated. I mean, together with Unieuropa, EuroCommerce is working on the skills partnership, and this for us as well is a first conversation of being able to try and see, okay, what is green skills? Do we have common ground? And I think it's very important to say some of the things that talk the same language. Employees and employers have to be talking that same language, and and it also filters a little bit the same language being talked about the consumer aspect. We heard earlier on that consumers want credibility, and also there has to be collaboration, but it seems to also very much filter down all the way to every single job. It seems to be where we're heading. So if I may just hand over to our final speaker, Thomas, you're coming from a slightly different perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, you are a Junior Achievement alumni. So people here may not be so familiar with what Junior Achievement is, but perhaps you can quickly explain that.
Yep. So it's an international organization which is the biggest and aims at providing young people with leadership skills, inspiring skills, mostly inside business environment or economic world, let's say. So it's an international organization, and here in Belgium, I took part in a program which helped me create a company when I was 17 years old. So yep, that's what we did at the time, and that's where I come from.
Excellent. And if I may just pick up on this part about this project as well, I think, as I understand it, it's something I did many years ago as well. It's about being hands-on as an entrepreneur. And how did you find this? And do you think this kind of hands-on project starts people on the track to really understanding what it is, that how things could work out, taking your education and matching it with the future labour market, let's say?
So certainly. So it was when I was 17, and we are probably the only school in Wallonia who does that, but it was compulsory for the people who had a minor in economics. So we were 30. The average number of participants per entity is 5. So we were 30, 17, 18 years old people, and we had to decide on a product. So at the time, we decided to sell a battery because 8 years ago, because that happened 8 years ago, we decided to sell a battery, a new portable battery for phones. It was very new, it was very trendy, catchy for us, because our phones would actually die in the middle of the day. You know, you can't reach Facebook, you can't reach Instagram. How are you going to do? So we decided on that. It's not something I would do now, for example, because at the time, and we talked about teachers teaching other people, my teachers did not challenge our idea. They didn't say, hey, do you know where this battery comes from? No. And on top of that, we would actually put a plastic around it. Hey, do you know where this plastic comes from? No, absolutely not.
And if I may, Thomas, because this experience, I think it was really hands-on, and do you think this is really a useful way to learn, even if the project itself maybe would be something different in the future, and also managing the number of people involved?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that must have been a real challenge.
So you had that, and of course you had to do the business analysis, you had to go on the market, you had to conduct everything that you normally should do before launching your business. And that's where you actually see how much skills and people are necessary. We were 17, 18 years old, and we learned a lot actually through this. And right now that I'm 8 years older, I realize how much I learned, even on a human side, but also on the knowledge side, because we asked questions back then that I actually had never thought of. And because we were 30, we actually needed to organize sellings, you know, in department stores or whatever. So we had to have people there. What if someone comes late, 30 minutes late, say, and he is the only person who got a training to sell? Spoiler alert, it happened. How do you do? What do you do? And I think when we talk about green skills, it's more or less the same, is the capability. But at the time, I realize now, I wish I could have asked the right questions to be able to make more conscious choices, for example. And I'm very happy that we talked earlier about greenwashing, and that consumers are ready to pay for something they see meaning in. For example, a battery with a wrap of plastic around it, I don't see how I could have sold it as possibly green. But then maybe you have new ways of doing it, and maybe I'll stop there with a phone. You've got Fairphone now in Belgium, which are sold, and it's basically phones where you can trace the pieces. They're not aimed at being greener, but because you know where they come from, because you can actually know the wages of the people who do that. It seems, and you have transparency back there, and I think that's maybe that's something I should have known 8 years ago.
And so even and let me just pick up on that as well. I mean, now I think it's been very interesting to hear people talk really about how you're building green into jobs and how actually you can make entrepreneurs also have that feeling of green and think green, let's say, perhaps. So is your feeling, even though you think already 8 years ago it wasn't quite up to speed, but do you think that those that are coming through the education system really are ready now? And are they being trained to be critical thinkers, to think about innovatively a little bit, to understand how they could perhaps minimize the consequences of their actions?
Spoiler alert, no. No. I think a lot of education has to be done by individuals right now. I educated myself because I had the background to do it. Most people might not have the necessarily background to educate themselves, or they may educate themselves but actually got wrong information. I don't need to tell people about fake news, or when you got different streams of data with different numbers, how do you compare them? How do you assess critically them? So no, I think there's a lot to be done. Schools are doing it at a younger age. They're doing it with younger people. But I think there's a lot to be made when you reach higher education, for example.
It's quite interesting because I speak often about my 9-year-old son, and I asked him the same question. And he said, I'm totally ready. It's ingrained in me completely already. So there is hope for the future. So thank you for that, Thomas. And if I may actually just turn back to you, Manuela, just before we move on to sort of questions from the audience, I just wondered if you have any reflections on what you've heard, and do you have a feeling that retail and wholesale might be moving in the right direction? I think we also heard a little that perhaps we're still at the infancy and we might need to accelerate. And it's also interesting, I think, with the numbers that we advertised a little bit at the beginning of the session as well, that there really is sort of a real need for SMEs to double their investments, for larger companies to be spending 30% more on skills. And this is basically the additional up to 35 billion that needs to be spent between now and 2030. So I just was be interested in hearing your thoughts on what you've heard. I think it's a lot of food for thought. So please go ahead.
Indeed, a lot of food for thought. I think there were, well, I think first of all, there is a difficulty when you speak about green skills, because what are green skills? There is no real definition of green skills. Green skills can be technical green skills, like you are a solar panel installer and you need to have some specific technical skills, or it may be about sustainability, which is about a lot what was the talk here. So first of all is an understanding what is green skills, how do we understand them. Then of course I think the best way to look at that is not as green skills but skills for the green transition, because that's our objective, is to master the green transition. And I think what I liked a lot here around this panel was about joining forces, because I think none can do it themselves. Social partners alone cannot do it. They also need public authorities. They also need the workers. We also need public employment services to join in. And I think you are also involved in one of the large-scale partnerships of the Pact for Skills. So I really would welcome that effort, because I think it's, first of all, a recognition that we need to work together if we want to achieve that common aim, but there is also a motivation behind that to achieve that aim. And I think everyone can give their own contribution. So I was very pleased to hear that.
Thank you. And I think we will come back to the panel just for a roundup later, but we have some time for questions. So I don't know if anyone has a question straight off. I think people are being shy. In which case I can give you also a little bit of time to think about it. I mean, one of the questions that always comes to me is, listening now, there's been a lesson that could have been learnt from the digital. I mean, digital has really transformed retail and wholesale. And I wondered if there are lessons that can be learned from the fact that sometimes it could be said that COVID accelerated this super fast for retail and wholesale. But it doesn't need a shock event for green. Okay, we have obviously some shock events that are making the transformation more imperative. But do you think there could be lessons, and this is for anyone in the panel, and also invite the audience to reflect as well. Do you think there could be lessons that are learned from the digital transformation that we should be applying to the green transformation, or are they the same? Go ahead.
Well, I think in the digital transition, we see that 9 of 10 jobs need digital skills. So it's clear if you don't have any basic digital skills, you will have difficulty in finding a job. And I think the same in Europe with the targets we have set for a carbon neutral Europe, we will have to think that way too. Mm-hmm. So I think this is really our objective. I think what is really important, and what the COVID pandemic has shown for the digital, and that has to be also in our mind for the green transition, is to make sure that these transitions are fair, so that everybody has the chance to do this, to survive and live and master the transition as an actor, not as a victim. So this is really the important change that we should be after in the green transition, as in the digital transition. We've seen that we know that children that went to school in some countries lost, maybe not so much in Europe, a year of schooling, basically because they didn't have access to the hardware that they needed, and also the teachers were not ready to teach in that way. And the same comes for green. The only thing is that for green, it's a survival mode, because we only have one planet. So it's even more important that we manage this in a fair way.
Thank you. David, please go ahead.
Maybe just a consideration we were making with the colleagues of the association, that the most sustainable way to sell products is click and collect. Because if you simply go in the shop, maybe you don't find what you're looking for, and you have to travel for many shops. So this is not very sustainable. If you order online and you receive online, not necessarily this delivery is green. And of course, bringing one by one products at home cannot be more sustainable than delivering all the products in a shop and then picking up from there. Although some studies are trying to say different thing, but they are a little bit promoted by pure players online. But okay, of course, they speak for their part. But click and collect is definitely the best way, because people know exactly what they can find, so they go direct. Secondly, not necessarily they go by car. They maybe go to collect their product because they're already around by public transportation. Secondly, they try maybe to put together what they have to do when they have a clear route for collecting products. So I would say that if we would score the sustainability of a retailer, biggest is the percentage of click and collect, best is the performance of this retailer. And pushing in that direction consumers, I think, is very green and sustainable. This is just, okay, we have not yet thinking, maybe we need the consultants to say how important is this. But I'm sure this is just something that is coming from experience of the people in the shops, our members. But I think that making an in-depth analysis of this click and collect model, I think would bring us to very, very new results, and this can be really the future of retail.
I think it's an interesting idea going back on the credibility as well in bringing consumers along. I think at EuroCommerce, there's lots of different words for omni-channel, multi-channel, all of these things. But I think what I'm tending to use now is that there's a seamless, customers are expecting a seamless interaction between offline and online. So I think it will also come down to what they are interested in, and actually being able to have the methodology perhaps to understand what's really behind it as well. So it's an interesting insight. Now, I don't know if there's any other questions from the audience, or maybe from the panelists as well. I leave it open, but Joanna, please go ahead. Oh, and there's one in the back after.
I just had a question about apprenticeships and the role of apprenticeships, and whether or not anybody has any views on why there aren't more of them, or Or what needs to be done to encourage people to think about apprenticeships and the role that they play in getting people maybe more mobile in their careers, but also getting careers started in the first place.
I think there's a question about. Please go
If I
ahead.
may jump on that, because I did an internship last year. Now apprenticeship are rather different. Well, tomato, but anyway. As it happens, I worked on the topic last year with a group of other people, and we looked at Belgium. So I can only talk for Belgium. From the 500 interviews that we conducted, we realized that actually mostly the people who did apprenticeships, the apprentices, they didn't feel that they got knowledge from the people they worked for, or in any case, because it's not the same as an internship, right? You're there to learn hands-on competencies. It seems that they were more focused on making those people employable and so ready to work inside a company and more autonomous. So the focus is really on you can become an actor inside a company. The focus is not on green skills, or the focus is not on, hey, look, where does the wood come from? Who are our partners, for example? So there is the focus is much deeper on making those people ready to work. If you look at internships, it's a bit of the same actually. It's making those people autonomous, ready to work, without for the person who supervises that younger to have to be always sitting next to him or her. So I think that right now this shift has to happen, and depending on the sector you're talking about, it must happen differently, because if you have small entrepreneurs working on a more local scale, who are, for example, coming to repair your roof, it's much more difficult for them, because mostly if you want to get someone to repair your roof, unless it's urgent, you have to wait 3 months. Now, if you look at maybe bigger companies, we're talking about woods, so maybe you have something about that at IKEA. But if you look at a bigger scale, you might have there more capabilities to invest and to go deeper into that. So I think there is a question of sector and a question of scale, but that is just my opinion on that.
Thank you. I think it's important that it's always nice to see that there are schemes out there that are preparing people for work outside of the education system. So it was an interesting question. I don't know if anybody wants to come in on this one. Otherwise, I will turn to the back. There's a question there. If not, please go ahead.
Thank you. Compliments for the quality. Introduction by McKinsey and feedback by the panel. I have a general question related to Africa. I'm here with David Bola, who's an entrepreneur from DR Congo. And I would like first to ask to McKinsey, as an international consulting firm, how they integrated Africa in their advising for these projects in Europe, as a first question. And then separately to each of the members of the panel, what their views is in terms of how can we contribute to make sure Africa is also joining this effort in Europe, in the frame of the discussions we had all together in February 2022 during the African Union and European Union high-level get-together in Brussels. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you would like to react from McKinsey's side.
Yes.
If I may, I'm going to respond with a question. Could you perhaps clarify a bit what you're looking for? Because of course we take a global context. If we do work for clients and if they have an African footprint, we take it into account. But if you have something more specific in mind, I would like to understand.
as McKinsey, as a global quality high-level consulting firm, advising global corporations, institutions on a number of next steps, territory. How do you integrate the idea, the concept, the reality, passion, the difficulty, geopolitical issues related to Africa?
Mm.
Please.
So I think we do that in the same way as we would do that, for instance, for certain parts of Latin America. Yeah. So I will give a very concrete example. So I've done a study for a food manufacturer on where they should put their next factory, and the scope was the globe. Yeah. And so we looked for all countries at all different possible parameters. So security of supply, how will global warming affect the agricultural environment? What are the trading routes and how do we expect them to evolve? What's the economic stability of the country and how is that expected to change, etc., etc. And that grid applied in the same way across all those markets. And by the way, by that definition, both Latin America and Africa were excluded from the equation, either because of drought, yeah, or because of political instability. So I would say that the way we look at these things, I mean, I don't think we look at Africa differently than we would look at other parts of the world. We try to have an objective lens based, of course, also on the business objectives of the client. Also, if you look at our macroeconomic work published by the McKinsey Global Institute, they take a full macroeconomic perspective on all the different continents. Yeah, and I would not say that Africa does not get a differentiated, both not a negative nor a positive specific treatment in that perspective.
And also, if I may just also mention that the study that was looking at really the investment needs, it had a very European focus because it was linked to our membership as EuroCommerce as well. So that perhaps narrowed, maybe, as you say, the parameters. So it wasn't in consideration, but it was also looking really at European country needs in Europe at that moment. But I don't know.
Maybe just one thing,
Yes.
just to add. I think when we look at sustainability, obviously the challenges that we see with, if I look at agriculture, for example, it's a very, very different reality versus looking at large scale, well-established agriculture, modern agriculture that we see predominantly in Europe, versus when we start looking at other economies where it's much more fragmented, smaller scale farms, harder to get to in certain locations. And that, when it comes to, for example, something like supply chain transparency, that's of course where we work with our clients to then say, well, the technology that's required for you, if you have a large amount of your products that are sourced from economies that are more fragmented, well, then we need to look at technological solutions that allow for different types of supply chain transparency. We need to look at different types of upskilling because not every single farmer or individual in those countries have the same investment capabilities that we find in Europe, for example. So as we advise our clients and with the ambition to go kind of net zero by 2030, of course, as part of that advice, we need to think through that the economic conditions and structural conditions of those economies can differ widely, and therefore the solution also has to differ widely.
One thing about Africa, very small, but is a normal consideration. We all know all of this, but maybe it could be interesting to mention this. Just a few weeks ago has been released the movie, a docu-film called The Terra Viva, which is talking about the problem of electronic waste. And what was very embarrassing in this movie is to see how much of this waste is going to Africa. And how terrible is not only the people working there is already a bad thing, but the full pollution of the waters, of the minimum water is already available, is even more worse what's going on because of these materials, and how this traffic of electronic waste should be stopped. But so far has not been done. So the first thing is to make these materials no more available for these traders, to work hard that at least not a single of these raw material is going to Africa to be again worked on, but all the treatment will be done here, possibly in the closest area where the products are finishing their lifetime. And this would be already a very good step that this sector, the sector of consumer electronics, can do for Africa. It's already a good thing if we don't do nothing bad instead of planning to do something good. Would be already very, very important to stop this terrible pollution of very large areas. And unfortunately, this phenomenon is increasing instead of decreasing. So really something at a very high level must be taken there. And this docu-film, I will give you the link, can be seen. It's very interesting.
Thank you. I think Annika had one point, if I may, just offer the mic first.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if this what we are doing will answer to your question, but I'm from European Trade Union Federation, but we also have a global part, and there we have different regions, and one of them is of course Africa. And what we are doing, that we are working with big multinational companies, and we have global framework agreements. So by them, we can reach out when there is a problem in a specific multinational company in any country, so to say. But where, so what we do is we support our affiliates. We also support the workers. So in that way, we can reach out, and because there is some commitments even to the green and sustainability in the global framework agreements. So in that way, we can try to support and have an impact.
Thank you. I think it does look like it is for everybody. I know that I'm just conscious of the time, so I wondered if there's one last burning question or one last comment. Otherwise, I will pan back to the panel to just sum up. No last questions. Then perhaps if I may, I'm hoping that it's been quite an interesting panel discussion for everybody. I mean, I think the last couple of comments there also show that really it's about collaboration, it's about everybody. So it does seem that this is very important from my perspective, I think, and that retail and wholesale really, if it has the capacity to invest, this is really definitely something in green skills, has to be something that we're not running behind on. So I perhaps may invite just from Annika through round, just if you have a 30-second takeaway or just something that you've learned or a question that perhaps can be left hanging for discussion afterwards as well, please go ahead.
I already have dropped some questions. So, but for me, I'm looking at you because you in the introduction mentioned that there's a need for changing mindset of adults when it comes to training. I'm not completely agree that it's the mindset of the adults or the workers that needs to be changed. I think this is something that you need to do, because for making training, you have to have access to training. It has to be on working time. It has to be relevant. You have to be involved. There has to be an ownership. There has to be career possibilities and so much more. So I don't think it's just changing a mindset, because I don't believe in when people say that workers don't want training, because that's not the truth.
Okay, so well, I think what to say. What I wanted to say is that we need to learn during our lifetime, whether it's for work or for our private life. So we are now used to learn at school and then forget about it. And the context we are living now, the moment we are living now in history is one where we need to adapt our skills throughout our working life. And that is really very important. And it's actually having the right skills that can also help us access the better jobs and quality jobs. So this is also a very important message that the European Commission has really put up front. And I fully agree with you that a good quality jobs means also good working conditions. But here we are speaking about green skills, and having the right skills is a good step into someone's future, in each other's future. Thank you.
Maybe to build on what you both have said, I think one thing that I'm sitting with is what we've all mentioned in some way, which is green skills, and what we mean by it is still a bit elusive, and it is right now different. We would probably define and articulate it differently than everybody else on this panel from a company perspective. So I think that's something that from a reality perspective, we either need to be okay with and figure out what are like those keystones that should be in every strategy, no matter what the variance is, or I would say magically we need to align globally on how we define it. And I think maybe that is a lesson learned from the digital transformation, that it's really hard to have companies across multiple geographies and multiple industries align on the definition for skills. The last thing that I'll say, tied to what you were talking about, I do think learning equity is a huge challenge for frontline populations, which when you're in retail and wholesale, there's quite a few of those. And so ensuring that people have the right access, but not even just access, but the right parameters in their working environment to learn is something that we are very focused on right now. So.
On my side, I think the most important thing would be to give meaning to those skills, because it's not just us doing it for the next 20 years, it's us learning it and then passing it on so that in the next centuries it's still there, and preferably in a better way. So I think what lacks is meaning as to why, okay, climate is changing, okay, but then there are so many other things and other reasons for which we can do it. So to me, it would be give meaning to this change so that people can embrace that meaning and make it their own. I think that's also what's lacking.
Okay. When I was his age, so ages ago, I was told that pollution was a price to pay for technological evolution. Faster airplanes, faster cars, faster machine, large factories. Nowadays, technology is the price that has been paid to have a better world. And this not only when we speak about the big invention, the atomium or whatever, but also in consumer electronic. And as retailers of consumer electronic products, we're trying to deliver this message through our guys. And this is what we try to do every day.
Thank you, everybody. I think I will hand over to Joanna just to sum up. But on my part, thank you very much for an incredibly interesting panel discussion that's probably left a few more questions. But you can remain in your seats for the moment, and Joanna will just sum up.
Well, thank you very much, Lena. Not the easiest task, I wouldn't say, but plenty going through our minds now, I think. And what perhaps struck me, obviously, as you were all speaking, is the importance, the really critical importance of this European Year of Skills. There's clearly a lot that we need to do, and it's really imperative that we make progress. And it's quite worrying when we hear that we're not doing well at all in imparting skills, especially to those who are most vulnerable in society and the least skilled and the least educated with the fewest opportunities. So we've got a lot to focus our minds on there, and because there is huge potential for the continent as a whole. And part of it also made me think about one of the pieces of the Green Deal, in fact, which is the just transition and taking everyone with us and not leaving anybody behind. The saying always goes, it's you, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I really think that this collaboration element that Lena referred to as well, it's difficult. It's really hard to make it work. It requires disruptive approaches, which are always difficult to deal with. And it also requires really multidisciplinary type collaboration, which is even harder, I think. So now we're getting to a stage where people are talking about AI very often in a very kind of scary, threatening way. And I think it's beginning to quite quickly filter down into the general population that this might not be an entirely good thing for us. And I think we need to sort of try and find ways to see this as an opportunity rather than a threat, or to make sure it's an opportunity and not a threat. So that just as with COVID and the changes and the disruption that we saw and the advances in digitalization that came from that very big disruption, not that we want another one like that anytime soon, but I think it's thinking about moving from the linear economy to the circular economy, decoupling our dependence on fossil, and thinking how can we create the skills and the jobs that will help us do that. So there's plenty of motivation, but I do think all the topics that the panelists and the speakers mentioned today about the need for ownership of the agenda, the need for the student to become the teacher, to make the most of the resources, to pass on the knowledge in the most effective way possible, to try and develop a common understanding of, as we were saying, of what green skills actually are, what they might mean to different groups, the importance of communication, creating competition to incentivize people to find new solutions, and of innovation. So I think there's many fantastic ideas there, and I don't think we're ever going to find a one-size-fits-all with this one. So we need to use everything that we have in the toolbox and to really be looking back on this year, hopefully in 5 years' time, and thinking how much progress we've made. But all that to say, thank you so much to our brilliant speakers today, all of you, and to everybody who's joined here. It's fantastic for us to have had you as our audience, and we hope to continue this dialogue and this debate going forwards. So thank you all very much.